It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me. Craig, shut up.
Hey, I need you guys to do these things.
I'm Craig Price, professional bastard. Nice to meet you. Welcome to another Reality Check with Craig Price. I am your host, Craig Price, and this week my guest is Greg Kozera, who joins me to talk about the controversial procedure known as fracking. Now, fracking, for those of you who may not know, is a method used to extract natural gas from the ground. What they do is they drill a hole, they inject it with this fluid, it breaks up the rock, and releases the natural gas for which they can collect and send to your house. It's been in use for a long time, and there's been some recent documentaries and stories that have brought up some concerns about the safety of using fracking. Now, I'm not one to take anything any corporation says at face value, but I also know that documentaries are also created with a bias, and they're not the most balanced informational films from the 50s that we remember. They can be manipulative and misleading as much as any mega conglomeration media campaign can be. So it's really hard to get accurate information because you've got two sides telling their story and they don't seem to mesh. Sound familiar? Yeah, good luck voting this year. All I know is I don't know. And I'm offering you today is one side of the story. Honestly, I don't know, so I asked Greg to come on and give his opinion and information on fracking. I also don't have a counter argument ready to go. If you know someone who's qualified to talk about fracking, let me know. I'll be glad to have them come on the show. I don't know or have access to those people, but you can email me, Craig@speakercraigprice.com. I'd certainly love to get both sides of this issue. I'm always glad to hear another view, so let me know. But thankfully, today, Greg is here to talk about a lot of the questions and concerns people have about this fracking, so let's dive in and learn from Greg Kozera. Fracking is something I have only heard through Battlestar Galactica. It's usually a nice little way of saying the F word on national television without getting censored. So, can you explain to me what fracking is?
Sure. What it is, Craig, is in the oil and natural gas business. Of course, most people know about Jed Clampett and shooting at some food, and up through the ground comes a bubbling crude. And of course, you see all the old movies, the gushers in Texas and Oklahoma, where they suddenly drill in and there's all this. Well, that's way back when that may have been reality, but the reality is the most oil and gas reservoirs that just doesn't happen that way. There's just not enough. We'll call it porosity and permeability, but oil and gas just doesn't flow like that. And what fracking does, or hydraulic fracturing, is it's a way of putting a small crack in that oil and gas reservoir that allow that oil and gas to flow out. It's kind of like in Houston, if you stop and think about it, if everybody was trying to get out of downtown at the same time, which they do at 5 o'clock, it doesn't happen very easily.
Living in Houston, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I've been downtown, and oh my God. But imagine, of course, Houston would probably take more than that, but what if you had a 20-lane highway in each, just, you still there?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Oh, good, something happened. And all of a sudden, if it was going in two directions out of town, east and west, 20 lanes, all outbound, now off that 20-lane highway, can you imagine, that would be kind of like what a frac does, is all of a sudden all that traffic, instead of being trapped, can flow. Of course, the flow would become, or let's just say everybody was going into town. You'd have 20 lanes from both directions. Now, when we drill horizontal well underground, which is kind of like a water line or a pipeline, except it's like 1.5 miles deep, and they do every several hundred feet, they'll do little fracks off of that. That would be like that 20-lane highway, and then you would have north and south highways that may be 4 or 5 lanes. So can you imagine how the flow of traffic, how that changes everything if you had that massive, that whole highway system? And that's really what we're doing underground with a frac, is we're creating highways to allow those, that oil or that natural gas in those cases now, to get from the rock, which is, it's kind of like looking at a rock you pick up outside. There's actually, in an oil and gas reservoir, there's actually gas in those rocks, and it allows it to flow to the casing, which in most cases is 4.5 or 5.5 inches in diameter, and then it comes to the surface.
So what exactly are you pumping down there? Is it just water, or is it?
In most cases, it is. In today's world, with these horizontal fracks that we're doing in the Barnett and the Eagle Ford out in Texas and up here in the Marcellus in the Northeast, it's 95.5 or 99.5% is water and sand. That's all it is. Because you need the sand because Mother Nature wants to close. Once you create a crack and again, those cracks are a mile and a half deep. That crack wants to close just from the pressures of the rock, and the sand is what keeps it open. So you imagine that crack you're talking about a few grains of sand that are holding it open. So you're talking about something that's like 1/8 of an inch in just almost like a driveway crack that you get. Of course, I don't know if you guys get those in Texas because it doesn't freeze down there, but we see them up here. But so that's really what it is.
So what's the other percent? Because you said 99% of it is. So what else?
And then we have to have chemicals like soap to help reduce friction and carry the sand. There's some biocide, kind of like bactericide, like the soap we use to kill bacteria in your hands, because you don't want to pump a bunch of bacteria in the ground and let it grow. So there's a few things like that: friction reducers, surfactants that again, kind of like what we use, kind of like dish soap or laundry soap to help carry that material in there. Now, water, of course, that's one type of frack. The other fracks that we use a lot up here in West Virginia, in Kentucky, Virginia particularly, are nitrogen fracks, and we'll use that in some of the shallower reservoirs, and that's strictly nitrogen gas and no chemicals at all, and we'll pump that underground and create that crack. And same thing happens. Of course, nitrogen, 80% of our atmosphere is nitrogen. We breathe it. And that's, again, another type of frack that's used. And sometimes the industry will use what they call a foam frack, which is really like shaving cream, same thing, except we use nitrogen gas and water and sand in that case. And then we'll put some soap in there to kind of create a foam, kind of like you do. Well, like in your washer, or you see these big foam things. Well, that's what it is. So you have these foam bubbles, and it carries the sand. So that's probably the three most predominant type of hydraulic fracturing that's been done today.
Now it certainly uses quite a bit of fluid to do this, because what I'm seeing is I'm thinking it's taken like thousands and thousands of gallons, maybe millions of gallons to jam that into the ground.
In these shale reservoirs, like for instance in the Marcellus, that would be true, because some of these wells will take like 5 million gallons of water to do a well. But so that's a lot of water. Although what's going on today is, of course, that water doesn't stay in the ground. When the well is completed, it's flowed back. In other words, that allows the water to come out, and eventually the hydrocarbons come in afterward. And then the sand is what stays behind. But what industry does now, because it's expensive, you can imagine in West Texas, my God, to get water. So water is expensive to get, and more importantly, it's expensive to get rid of. So what industry does now is the clients that I deal with up here, basically all their water is reused. So they flow it back, it goes into tanks, it's treated so that, you still get the, if there's any solids, they drop those out. But then, they make sure that sometimes there's some residual chemical that comes back, so you don't need as much chemical when you frack the next stage for that stuff. So what they'll do is they'll clean up that water, and it becomes a closed system. So you're not constantly using fresh water. And really a lot of the water that's being used anymore is not drinking water quality, because you don't need drinking water quality. So we're really, as an industry, they're using a lot of the marginal waters that, matter of fact, in some cases, we're using acid mine water that was actually polluting streams. So they're actually being able to clean that up and use it to frack with. So a lot of different ways you can get there without tapping into people's drinking water sources. So, again, reduce, reuse, recycle, good stuff.
Well, you brought up the drinking water, and I noticed that one of the concerns about fracking And I think it's just more of they assume this is going to happen. I don't know if there's actual record of it, a consistent record of these extra chemicals or this marginal water getting into the groundwater.
That's really, I think, Craig, that you've hit probably the biggest fear that people have, and there's a lot of stuff out there, and that's one of the main reasons that I wrote Just the Fracks, because it's kind of like, you and I are professional speakers, and if someone wrote a bunch of stuff about professional speakers, let's just say they said, all the professional speakers, they're drunks, you can't trust them, and all this other stuff. Well, we know that's false.
Well,
and
that's somewhat false. It's
okay.
there is definitely some evidence I could easily get on that being true. But I get your point.
If they use the word "all," that would be
that's right.
That's the catch. Yeah, I think you're right. There probably are a few speakers out there that might.
Maybe more than a few, but just this would be a perfect time to just let my guests, my listeners know that I'm here with Greg Kozera. He's written this book called Just the Fracks, Ma'am, and that's why I wanted you on here. It's the truth about hydrofracking and the next great American boom, which you can get on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles and Books A Million. And so you wrote this book because of the groundwater issue. Is that what I'm hearing?
In part, yeah, and not just the groundwater, but is it, I've been, in addition to my speaking and everything, but I've been involved in the oil and natural gas industry for over 35 years. And, all of a sudden we started seeing these, let's face it, 5-6 years ago, we were talking about importing natural gas from places like Russia and Iran and Venezuela. From all our buddies, they were talking about bringing gas into this country. And we didn't have, at that point, we didn't know that we even had the resources available. And thanks to technology, it started down in Texas with the Barnett Shale in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And now the Eagle Ford in West Texas. We've got the Marcellus here in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and then the place like the Bakken up into the coast. All of a sudden, we started discovering these other reservoirs. The only thing that changed was we began to drill horizontally efficiently, and we began to fracturing's an old technology, been used for 65 years. But when we drilled horizontally and began to frack those reservoirs, now that changed everything, and we were excited. It's like, wow, all of a sudden, maybe my kid's not going to have to go back to the Mideast again. Really serious stuff. My kids are going to have energy, so we'll be able to run our cars and actually light our homes for the next 50 years. Well, we were excited about it, and all of a sudden we started hearing this stuff about fracking and poisoning groundwater and all these bad things. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's a bunch of crap. And when you look at it, the sad part is it was all based on fear and emotion and lack of knowledge instead of science. I'll go head to head with anybody with science and engineering, because that's what we, so here's the bottom line is, yeah, can fracking damage groundwater? No. End of story. No. End of story. It's impossible. And here's why. 2 reasons. One, in the drilling process, if there was ever going to be any issues, that would be when it happens, when the drill bit actually goes through the fresh water. Well, that's all cased off. And not only is it cased, but in the book, there's it actually shows 5, in this particular case, 4 casings. In the Marcellus, are actually using 5. Think about it, 5 steel pipes in the ground, and all of them are cemented. So we're not talking, not only to the rock, but to each other. So now you've got this basically probably 4 or 5 inches of casing and cement protecting the groundwater from the natural gas that's in that 4.5 or 5.5 inch pipe in the middle. That's incredible. So you got that protected. And, the frack itself, that crack that's created 1.5 miles underground, physically can't, people talk about it going up 7,000 or 8,000 feet to someone's water well. Impossible, can't happen. And the way I can best describe that, I don't know about you, Craig, but, I've hiked here in West Virginia. We got to hike up some mountains. Matter of fact, I took my wife, was in an accident in April, and I had to push her in a wheelchair around Disney World with the grandkids last May. Now, I don't know if you know about that. There's hills in Disney World. I never noticed it until I was pushing my wife in a wheelchair. I was like, my God, this is hard. Well, think about it. If you're a water molecule at 7,000 feet, what would you rather do? Fight 7,000 feet of rock and rock pressure to get to the surface, or would you rather kind of go on the level or maybe even go down a little deeper? So it's really all about gravity. I mean, rocks or water doesn't want to go to the surface. It would rather go down. So, and that's really, what we see when we actually, and I've done some work in Virginia where we actually frack coal mines. They've been doing it since 1984. And, you probably heard about, even in Texas about Sago and Upper Big Branch. These are the mines that had explosions and killed miners. Bad thing. Well, in Virginia, a company called Consol Coal started fracking the coal, which is about 1,500 feet deep there, in the 1980s. I was involved in that project. Their plan was to frack the coal and produce the gas out of that coal before the miners got there. And what they were successful in doing, Craig, was creating a mine that was, they got the gas out. So by the time the miners got there wasn't any methane to blow up. So you got a safer mine. They could mine faster. It reduced their overall cost. And instead of that methane going into the atmosphere to create greenhouse gas, they put it into pipelines and sold it for people's heating needs and electricity generation. It's like, wow, how cool is that?
Well, that leads. Well, I was going to say this gas situation leads to.
That's just our retriever.
That's all right. I've been barked at twice already today by other folks. But I was talking about there's this movie that I know you're very much well aware of. It's a documentary called Gasland.
Oh yeah.
And it shows people lighting their water out of the pipes on fire as the methane comes through. What is going on there? Because I've always taken these documentaries as a point of view and often biased, on both sides. Anybody who shows me a documentary, it very rarely is a neutral subject, because otherwise it would probably be kind of boring.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, in that film, he tells a pretty good story. He really does. Story is the operative word here. But here's the thing, and being a professional speaker was kind of funny, because I'm also the president of the Virginia Oil and Gas Association. And when they showed that movie down in Abingdon, Virginia, I got to be the first industry speaker after that. And they turned the lights out, and there's a couple hundred people in the audience, and they start lighting, they show the film, and they light the water, and people gasp. And I am loaded for bear. I got facts in front of me. And then all of a sudden I realized that, oh my God, what would Nita Cobain or Mark Sanborn say? As speakers, we speak to the heart. I'm thinking, I threw my facts away. But I was fortunate enough to do one thing. I made a call, because before I went to this meeting, I wanted to prepare. And I noticed where he lights that water at is a place called Dimock, Pennsylvania. And anybody can do it. You pull out a state map of Pennsylvania, and just north of the town of Dimock, about 10 miles, there's a blue pine tree. It's called Salt Spring State Park. And I thought, as an engineer and technical guy, I'm thinking, that's an odd name. I mean, it could be Sweet Spring or Hot Spring or Warm Spring, but Salt Spring, that just it bothered me. Made 2 phone calls, got hold of a lady that ran the park, Craig. And here's what she said. I said, tell me about your park. And she's telling me about all the cabins. And she really loves this park, you can tell. And I said, tell me, how did it get its name? She said, we have these natural salt springs. And she said, it's the methane in the ground that brings this salt water to the surface. And she said, that's where, back in pioneer days, that's where the pioneers would take this and they would evaporate the water, and that would be where the salt came from. And then she's really excited. I could tell she's really excited. She says, Ann, she says, if the weather conditions are just right, you could go down to that spring and you could light the water. I'm thinking, whoa, they've been lighting water in Dimock, PA for over 200 years. And when I talked I visited with the crowd, with the audience a little bit, and talked about my concern for my kids and my grandkids and my son's on his third tour in the Mideast. And then I pointed to the film. I said, look, I just told that story, and I said, I found that out in 2 phone calls. Why didn't Mr. Fox make those same 2 phone calls? And what we find out in Dimock is that the natural gas has nothing to do, and that water has nothing to do with hydraulic fracturing at all. The Drake well in Pennsylvania, first oil well drilled in the country, in the United States, is 59.5 feet deep. Most people, whether you're in Texas or Pennsylvania, your water wells are at least that deep or deeper. So in Pennsylvania, in 1890 or in 1950, if you drilled a water well, or 2012, if you drill a water well 60 feet deep, you're going to probably have a little bit of natural gas in it, and you're going to have some oil in it, and it's not going to come from fracking at all. It's going to come from what's already in the ground. First well in West Virginia, they dug it in 1815. It's on the second page of the book, and they hit methane. As a matter of fact, they had this massive explosion and fire and everything, and that's probably 25 feet deep in the ground. So it's here. It's in the raw. As a matter of fact, George Washington was involved with buying some property back in the 1700s that they were trying to get oil, even for whatever they used back then. But so methane in shallow reservoirs is very common.
So you're basically, this person is monopolizing or exploiting a coincidence.
I would say that would be my opinion. I don't know. I can't get into someone's head, but it's pretty dramatic. So yeah, if you're going to make a film, and it is what it is. But the sad part is, in that particular film, none of the methane, none of the fire he showed in those scenes had anything to do with hydraulic fracturing or naturally occurring methane. And even the Colorado incident, the state out there proved that was the case. So yeah, I mean, it makes great viewing and a nice story. It's just not true.
Well, and then the other big hazard that I hear from, or perceived hazard I hear from fracking, is earthquakes.
Yeah, that's another dandy. It was funny. There was that big. You guys probably heard about the big Eastern earthquake that happened. Was it last summer or whatever? And I knew when that happened that someone would raise that question, because I was doing some radio appearances at that time, and that came up. And that they call it the mineral earthquake, which was near Richmond, Virginia, is probably 250 to 300 miles from the closest well. So there's nothing in the area at all. We've had earthquakes, they've been tracking these things since 1900. I mean, in our country, we've had millions of earthquakes, and the most powerful ones were all before 1940. That was before we even started to frack. So we've had earthquakes for years, and all of a sudden, someone is trying to tie earthquakes and fracking together.
But so you're saying that the fracking in no way causes any earthquakes of any type?
I've never heard. I can't believe it, and I don't. Matter of fact, I'll take it another step further. The state of Virginia actually did a study in the mid 1990s where they brought matter of fact, it was one of our company's frac crews. They were out there. We had the crew out there, and they brought out the seismic phones, and they did the whole thing, and they were going to determine, does fracking cause earthquakes? And the result is no, it didn't. No correlation at all. And they're right there, where if it was going to do anything, those seismic phones would be able to pick that up. So the short answer is, does fracking cause earthquakes? No.
Well, what I want to know, I got a question from online, is we talked about what's in the fluid, and it's 99% water and sand, and then there's some surfactants and cleaners and things and antibacterial things in there to make sure that we don't inject some kind of alien moss that'll grow and kill us later on.
Actually, that's not going to kill anybody. What it does do is, if you get the bacteria side, if you get bacteria growing, if it would, and it would, if you would propagate some in a well, it would restrict production. Is it going to? No, actually, if you want to find bacteria, do you know all you have to do? And it's really easy. Go to about half of the water wells in this country and find it.
Well, there's bacteria grows in some of the best and worst conditions on Earth. So bacteria is everywhere.
It's incredible. And that was the other piece I was going to mention, because people worry about fracking. I worry about not fracking, because if we don't frack, then we got to get our oil and gas from places like Russia and Iran. But more importantly, what I worry about is, when I lived in the country, I worry about my neighbors, because, I told you we got 4 or 5 pieces of pipe in the ground that are cemented. Well, guess what my neighbor's got? He's got a water well. It's got one piece of 4.5-inch pipe driven into the ground, probably 50 feet. There's no cement there. There's no regulation. Nobody checks that thing out, and it's been there for years. And for all I don't know what he's dumping next to it. And I got another neighbor maybe in his pig pen, for all I know. But the most dangerous thing we have to our groundwater is everybody's water well that is drilled into there that's not cemented, minimum casing, and but usually when someone calls me about, what about these chemicals? Well, we find them, and we find that it was the auto parts store that actually happened up in Dimmock. They found an auto parts store that was dumping their waste oil and their antifreeze out back, and guess what it does? It goes down through the soil into the water table. So that's our thing. If we're going to really worry about people's water, what we ought to be doing, and there's no regs up in this part of the world, let's look at the water wells. Because that's where the danger is. It really is.
Well, where are you getting so much of this water? I mean, like you were talking about, in Texas, which is in severe drought right now. I mean, and you're saying that it needs millions of gallons of water to frack. Where are they getting a lot of that water from? I know you said.
I don't know what they do out in Texas. My guess would be they would get it from other wells. Water. I'm not talking about water wells now. I'm talking about natural gas wells. I don't know for sure because I don't work out there. But up here, because wells produce, again, when you put water in, it comes back out. It doesn't stay in the ground. Mother Nature forces it back out. So right now, most of the water we're getting comes from existing wells, or in some cases where we live, when coal mining produces water. So a lot of the water comes from those sources too. And some of it does come from rivers. So, there's actually restrictions on where you can take your water from and how much you can take and a lot of that stuff.
Now, are you seeing, with all this propaganda that's out there on both sides, quite frankly, because, it's hard to understand when you see BP spill oil into the Gulf, which is, I know it's a completely different situation than fracking, but I mean, it's more of a corporate mentality of they're going to cut costs and they're going to cut edge and kind of, take shortcuts. And then you have these people on the other side, the environmentalists, who will exploit coincidences and distort facts. How can we find out what the real truth is?
I guess, that's a great question, and it's certainly a valid concern that people have. I guess the best thing that I can say is I challenge people to use common sense and try to educate them. Don't take my word for it. Look at my credentials, look at the work I've done, and think about it. Don't just, because someone wrote something online or you heard someone from someone who told you someone, is look at the facts look at the information that's out there and see what makes sense. If some professor is talking about the dangers of fracking, what's their credentials? Are they a professor of biology or of economics, or are they the chairman of the Petroleum Engineering Department at UT or OU? That's the thing. I mean, look who's out there, because I've been on panels and wait a minute, here's a guy that doesn't know anything about fracking. It would be like me being on a panel talking about microbiology. I mean, I can voice my opinion, but I don't know anything about it, and I know enough to be dangerous. So look at who's talking and look at what they're saying and where do they get the information. And the other thing, I think, if we think about common sense, because again, it's fascinating. People talk about, okay, this frack. I've written op-eds. Yeah, people talk about this frack went up 7,000 feet into their groundwater. I think, well, if someone just stopped and slowed down and said, wait a minute, okay, 7,000 feet, it's going to go up 7,000 feet through rock. Does that make sense? It's going to fight gravity and get up there. Now, the other proof positive we have up here is I tell people, okay, coal mines are 800 or 900 feet deep. I talk to the mine managers. I said, how often do we frack into your coal mines? And they get all indignant and said, you've never fracked into a coal mine. If we can't frack into a coal mine at 1,000 feet, how in the world are you going to get someone's water well 50 feet? Can't be done. So that's why I ask people, think about what you're hearing. Does it make sense? Does it really look at it logically and see who's talking, why they said, and the other thing that I think is important to realize is, and most people don't know this, but most of the natural gas industry, until probably recently, were small people. I mean, we're not talking about the BPs and the Exxons and those guys are starting to get involved with it. But really, for years, the natural gas industry was small producers, the mom and the pop. They live here. They work here. It's their yard. It's their their air, their water, their kids. And I'll tell you what, the people, it's funny, the people I get to work with, and these are executives, they're environmentalists. They absolutely are. That's the cool thing, is they're concerned about the environment as much or greater than some of the people that claim to be environmentalists. And here's the neat thing about that most people don't know, but I'll put what the natural gas industry's done to clean up the environment up against anybody. It was just announced the week before last, Craig, that our greenhouse gas emissions in the United States are at 1992 levels. We've almost met the Kyoto Treaty guidelines. Isn't that fascinating?
Oh, that's amazing. That I think it's a lot more prevalent, which is why I think fracking has come to the forefront recently. I think people are starting to just pay attention more. Maybe they may be misguided attention, and they may think that fracking is good and fracking is bad, but at least they're paying attention in general.
I think they are. And really, what's neat is most people, what we find is in my communication, you've got that, and I'll call it that rabid 10% that, don't really, they're not going to listen. They really don't care. They've got their own opinion. And in my opinion, a lot of them have their own agenda, and it's not even an environmental agenda. So you get that small group. And everybody, there's a lot of folks like yourself that are in the middle saying, well, okay, what is true? What's fact? What's fiction? And so I think my message and the message I try to put across in the book is, look, this is a good process. It's an old process. It's been around 65 years. It's as old as television. And I've seen, personally, donuts and certainly tobacco have killed far more people. I've never been to a funeral of anybody that's been killed by fracking chemicals. I've been to funerals of folks that obesity or cancer, because they've smoked through packs a day, have taken them. So let's, look at the big pictures. Okay, what's it doing for our country? Well, A, jobs. B, we have a chance finally to be rid of foreign oil. And I'll tell you what, if I had to look any mother in the eye and if she's worried about fracking, I wouldn't worry about fracking. That doesn't scare me, because I know the truth. I know the safeties. I know that the states, whether you're talking about Texas or Pennsylvania or West Virginia or Virginia, between all the regs and everything that's going on, that's a good process. It's a safe process. But I can guarantee you this, that if we don't frack, there's a lot better chance that she's going to have a son or daughter in the Mideast. And I know personally people that have come back from there without limbs or worse.
Well, the book is Just the Fracks, Ma'am, The Truth About Hydrofracking and the Next Great American Boom. I think the big takeaway is, regardless of where you land on pro or con, you always want to double-check your sources, find out as much information as possible on both sides, not just one side. Well, Greg, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day. Where can people find you? The book is on Amazon. It's in Barnes & Noble's, Books A Million. But where can people find you if they want you to come out to speak?
Oh, they can go to my, you can go to the Just the Fracks book website. I'm also on AOL, just Kozera at AOL. You can find me that way. And matter of fact, it's funny. I do a lot of work on leadership and teamwork, and for some reason, the last 6 months, most of my talks have been on fracking, of all things. So imagine that.
Well, I'm going to use my Battlestar Galactica lingo, and we're going to get the frack out of here. But Greg, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Craig.
That's the show for this week. Thanks again to Greg Kozera for coming on the show. If you have any questions, comments, or guest suggestions, feel free to email me at craig@speakercraigprice.com. You can like the podcast page on Facebook. You can leave a review, hopefully 5 stars, on iTunes. Tell your friends, coworkers, and strangers about the show. Until then, we'll see you next week.